Alex adjusted the rearview mirror of his bus, the harsh fluorescent lights of the empty interior reflecting back at him. The night shift had always been a lonely gig, but he preferred the solitude over the chaos of daytime routes. He pulled the bulky vehicle into the depot's last stop for the night, the doors hissing open to release a gust of cold air. "Another quiet night," he muttered, checking his watch. It was 12:45 a.m., 15 minutes until his shift ended. The street outside was eerily silent, the distant hum of the city muted under a shroud of dense fog. Only the dim glow of a single streetlight punctuated the darkness. Alex's routine was simple. Finish the route, head back to the garage, and clock out. But tonight, something about the air felt off. He couldn't shake the sense that he wasn't alone. With a resigned sigh, Alex reached for his thermos, pouring the last remnants of lukewarm coffee into a disposable cup. He took a sip and leaned back, letting the warmth distract him from the creeping unease. The bus was empty. It always was at this hour. No one in their right mind rode the late route, and tonight seemed no different. Until he heard the footsteps. The sharp clack of boots on asphalt echoed through the quiet, slicing through the fog like a phantom presence. Alex's heart quickened as he squinted into the gloom, trying to pinpoint the source. The fog parted briefly, revealing a lone figure walking toward the bus. They appeared ordinary at first, a man in a dark coat with a battered suitcase clutched in one hand. But as they drew closer, Alex noticed peculiar details. Their gait was uneven, almost jerky, as though they were being pulled along by invisible strings. And their face, it was hard to make out, but something about it was wrong. Too pale, too hollow. The figure stopped at the open doors, their face obscured by the shadow of their hood. "This bus goes to Ravenswood, doesn't it?" The voice was raspy, strained, as though the words physically hurt to say. Alex frowned. Ravenswood? He racked his brain for the name. "Never heard of it. That's not on my route." The passenger didn't move. "It's where I need to go," they insisted, their tone sharper now. Alex hesitated, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed at him to close the doors and leave, but something about the figure's unwavering gaze rooted him in place. Against his better judgment, he nodded. "Fine, but only if it's nearby." The passengers stepped aboard without another word, their boots scuffing the metal floor as they took a seat near the back. Alex watched them in the mirror, his unease growing. Their suitcase was old and scuffed, the leather peeling away to reveal tattered fabric beneath. They clutched it tightly, as if it contained something precious or dangerous. Shaking off his discomfort, Alex shifted into gear and pulled away from the curb. The road stretched out before him in familiar patterns, the comforting monotony of his route easing his nerves. But as he drove, the landmarks began to change. First, the coffee shop on the corner was gone, replaced by an unfamiliar hardware store with boarded-up windows. Then the gas station that always stayed open late was dark, its sign flickering weakly before vanishing altogether. Alex's stomach knotted as he realized the streets themselves were unfamiliar. He hadn't made any turns, yet the world outside the bus seemed to have rearranged itself. "You sure this is the right way?" he called out, his voice straining to stay casual. The passenger didn't respond, their head tilted slightly as if listening to something Alex couldn't hear. The fog thickened, swallowing the road ahead in a suffocating gray blanket. Alex slowed the bus, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. He tried to focus on the yellow lines beneath the tires, the only anchor in this shifting, surreal landscape. But even those began to waver, twisting into shapes that defied logic. The passenger finally spoke. "You've almost reached the crossing." "What crossing?" Alex demanded, glancing in the mirror. The figure's face was still hidden, but their head was now turned directly toward him. "Where the hell are we?" "You'll see," came the cryptic reply. A chill ran down Alex's spine as the bus crested a hill, revealing a road that shouldn't have been there. It was narrow, lined with dead trees whose skeletal branches clawed at the air. The asphalt was cracked and uneven, as though it hadn't been used in decades. Against every rational thought, Alex found himself driving onto it. The fog thinned slightly, revealing an old, rusted sign that read, Ravenswood, 2 miles. Alex's pulse quickened. I told you, I don't know this place. I'm not supposed to be here. You are now, the passenger said softly, their tone almost satisfied. Before Alex could reply, the bus lurched violently, the tires screeching as they hit a deep pothole. The interior lights flickered, plunging the vehicle into intermittent darkness. When they stabilized, Alex glanced in the mirror and froze. The passenger was no longer alone. 2 more figures sat in the back, their features obscured but their presence undeniable. Alex's breath caught as he scanned the empty street outside. Where had they come from? How had they boarded without him noticing? The bus shuddered again, the engine groaning like a dying animal. The lights flickered once more, and in the brief darkness, Alex swore he heard whispers, low, guttural murmurs that seemed to come from all around him. Gripping the wheel tighter, he forced his gaze back to the road. This isn't happening, he whispered, his voice trembling. But deep down, he knew he was no longer in control. Alex's heart hammered as the bus groaned down the cracked and narrow road. The oppressive fog outside seemed alive, curling and writhing against the windows, as if trying to seep inside. His mind raced with questions, but fear clamped his throat shut. Who were the new passengers? How had they appeared? He risked another glance in the mirror. The 3 figures sat perfectly still, their faces turned toward the front of the bus, but shrouded in darkness. The first passenger, the one with the suitcase, was now seated in the middle of the group. Flanking them were 2 indistinct shapes that seemed more shadow than substance. Their heads tilted slightly, as though they were observing him. Alex forced his eyes back to the road, his palms slick with sweat. The bus rattled violently as the potholes grew deeper, and the dead trees lining the path seemed to lean closer with every passing second. Where are you taking me? Alex finally shouted, his voice cracking under the strain. What is this place? Ravenswood. The original passenger replied in that same raspy tone. They didn't turn to face him, but Alex swore he saw their hollow eyes glint in the mirror. It's just ahead. I don't want to go to Ravenswood. Alex snapped, slamming his fist on the dashboard. You tricked me? You. The bus jerked violently, the tires screeching as the road suddenly narrowed. Alex gritted his teeth, gripping the wheel with all his strength to keep the vehicle steady. The headlights flickered again, momentarily plunging everything into darkness. When the lights returned, Alex gasped. The dead trees were now gone, replaced by an open expanse of black water on either side of the road. The asphalt seemed to hover precariously above the inky void, the edges crumbling away like dry paper. There was no guardrail, no barrier, just an endless abyss stretching into nothingness. This can't be real, Alex whispered, his knuckles white on the wheel. The murky water shimmered unnaturally, its surface rippling without cause. He felt as though the bus was floating, drifting ever closer to the edge. The whispers returned, louder this time. They slithered through the air like an unseen predator, brushing against Alex's ears and burrowing into his mind. He couldn't make out the words, but their intent was clear. They wanted him to keep driving. Alex clenched his jaw, resisting the pull. I'm turning around, he announced, his voice trembling. I don't care where this road goes. I'm done. As he reached for the gear shift, the bus jolted to a sudden stop, the engine sputtering and dying. The lights flickered once more, and in that brief darkness, Alex felt a presence. Close, too close. When the light stabilized, one of the new passengers was standing directly behind him. Alex flinched, nearly leaping out of his seat. The figure was taller than he'd expected, their form unnaturally elongated. Their face was obscured, but their breath rasped in uneven bursts, loud enough to drown out Alex's panicked thoughts. Sit down, Alex yelled, his voice cracking. You're not supposed to. Before he could finish, the figure raised a hand, pointing toward the windshield. Their fingers were unnaturally long and bony, the skin stretched tight like old parchment. Drive, they hissed, the single word dripping with malice. Alex's instinct screamed at him to fight, to run, to do anything but obey. Yet his hands moved on their own, gripping the wheel and restarting the engine. The bus lurched forward, the road narrowing even further as the dark water below seemed to churn with anticipation. The whispers grew louder, accompanied by faint, otherworldly laughter. Alex's stomach churned as the landscape began to shift again. The horizon melted into itself, the black water rising to form twisted, jagged shapes that resembled faces, distorted and grotesque. Their hollow eyes seemed to watch him, their mouths opening and closing in silent screams. "Why are you doing this to me?" Alex cried, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of sounds. "What do you want?" The original passenger finally stood, their suitcase still clutched tightly in one hand. "You've already crossed over," they said, their tone devoid of any emotion. "There's no turning back." "Crossed over?" Alex echoed, his voice shaking. "Crossed over to what?" The passenger didn't answer. Instead, they opened their suitcase. Alex's breath caught as he glimpsed what was inside, a faint, pulsating glow that seemed to suck the light from its surroundings. The object was small, round, and unervingly organic, like a beating heart encased in glass. "What is that?" Alex demanded, his voice rising in panic. "What the hell is going on?" "It's the key," the passenger said simply, their hollow eyes locked on Alex. "And you're the last door." Before Alex could respond, the bus shook violently, as though something massive had struck its side. The headlights flickered and died, plunging the vehicle into complete darkness. The whispers turned into a deafening roar, a symphony of unearthly voices that clawed at Alex's sanity. He slammed on the brakes, but the bus didn't stop. It surged forward, the wheels screeching as the road beneath them began to crumble. Alex's vision blurred, the shadows around him shifting and writhing like living things. He gripped the wheel tighter, praying for the nightmare to end. And then, as suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. The bus came to an abrupt halt, the engine cutting out completely. Alex sat frozen in his seat, his chest heaving with labored breaths. The silence was oppressive, thicker than the fog outside. Slowly, he turned to face the interior of the bus. It was empty. The passengers were gone, their seats vacant, as though they'd never been occupied. Even the suitcase had disappeared, leaving no trace of its eerie glow. Alex's pulse pounded in his ears as he scanned the desolate interior, half expecting the figures to reappear. But they didn't. The only sound was the faint creak of the bus settling into place. Alex turned back to the windshield, his hands trembling as he gripped the wheel. The road ahead was gone, replaced by a sheer drop into the endless black abyss. And on the horizon, a faint, flickering light beckoned him forward. It was Ravenswood. It had to be. The faint light on the horizon glimmered like a distant beacon, growing brighter as Alex sat frozen in his seat. His mind screamed for him to abandon the bus, to leap into the darkness if it meant escaping whatever nightmare he had stumbled into. But his body betrayed him, locked in place as though invisible chains bound him to the driver's seat. Ravenswood. The name echoed in his mind, each repetition heavier than the last, as if the word itself carried an impossible weight. Against his better judgment, Alex reached for the ignition, his trembling fingers turning the key. The bus roared back to life, the engine's guttural growl sounding more alive than mechanical. The headlights flickered on, illuminating the broken path ahead. The road had reappeared, but it was different now. The asphalt was cracked and bleeding an oily, black substance that shimmered like liquid shadow. Strange, unearthly plants lined the edges, their tendrils swaying as though alive. The air outside the bus was thick with a faint red haze, and the light in the distance pulsed like a heartbeat, casting eerie shadows that danced across the landscape. Alex's throat was dry as he gripped the wheel, his knuckles pale against the worn leather. "I don't want to do this," he whispered to himself, though the emptiness around him offered no comfort. "I just want to go home." But the bus had other plans. It surged forward as if possessed, the steering wheel jerking under Alex's hands. He tried to brake, but the pedal was unresponsive, stuck underfoot. The vehicle hurtled down the twisted road, the wheels skidding on the black ooze that coated the asphalt. Alex clenched his teeth, struggling to maintain control as the landscape around him became increasingly alien. The dead trees were back, but they had transformed into grotesque caricatures of themselves. Their gnarled branches twisted into claw-like shapes, and their bark pulsated as though something beneath the surface was alive and moving. The crimson haze deepened, the light ahead now a searing beacon that burned into Alex's vision. And then the whispers returned. They were louder now, no longer indistinct murmurs but clear, chilling voices that spoke directly into Alex's mind. "You're almost there, Alex." His breath caught. They knew his name. "Ravenswood awaits." "Shut up," Alex yelled, slamming his fists against the wheel. "Leave me alone." The voices only laughed in response, a cold, hollow sound that filled the bus and reverberated through Alex's skull. The dashboard lights flickered, and for a moment, Alex saw his reflection in the windshield. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror, but something wasn't right. Behind him, shadows moved. He spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. The bus was still empty, or so it seemed, but the shadows on the seats were wrong, shifting and writhing like living things. Alex's eyes darted from one row to the next, searching for any sign of the passengers who had vanished earlier. Nothing. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The light ahead grew blinding, forcing Alex to squint as the bus barreled toward it. The air around him seemed to hum with energy, a low, vibrating tone that set his teeth on edge. The road beneath the wheels cracked and splintered, chunks of asphalt falling away into the black abyss on either side. Still, the bus pressed on, as though drawn toward the light by an unseen force. Finally, the vehicle screeched to a halt, throwing Alex forward against the wheel. The engine sputtered and died, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. Alex gasped for air, his chest heaving as he fought to steady his nerves. The light was gone. In its place stood a town, or what was left of one. The buildings were old and decrepit, their wooden frames rotting and sagging under the weight of time. Dim lanterns flickered in the windows, casting faint, sickly yellow glows onto the cracked cobblestone streets. The air smelled of decay and damp earth, and the eerie stillness made Alex's skin crawl. Ravenswood. The words surfaced in his mind again, unbidden. He felt as though the town was watching him, its darkened windows like eyes that followed his every move. The bus doors hissed open, the sound breaking the heavy silence. Alex stared at the empty doorway, his gut twisting with dread. Something, or someone was waiting for him out there. He could feel it. He didn't want to leave the bus, but staying felt equally dangerous. His hands shook as he unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, his legs weak beneath him. He stepped toward the open doors, peering into the suffocating gloom. "Hello," he called out, his voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" A long, agonizing silence followed. Then faintly a voice answered. "Welcome, Alex." The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, a disembodied whisper that sent a chill down his spine. He staggered back, his foot catching on the edge of the step. His eyes darted around the bus, searching for the source of the voice, but there was nothing, only shadows and silence. "Come," the voice urged, softer now, almost coaxing. "You've come this far." Alex's pulse thundered in his ears. Against every instinct, he stepped off the bus and onto the cobblestone street. The ground felt unnaturally cold beneath his feet, as though the town itself was leaching the warmth from his body. The moment he stepped away from the bus, its doors closed behind him with a loud clang. He spun around, but the vehicle was gone, vanished into the suffocating fog. Panic gripped him as he realized he was completely alone. Or so he thought. From the shadows of the nearest building, a figure emerged. It was the original passenger, their suitcase still clutched in one hand. But now, their face was fully visible, and it was not human. Their skin was a sickly gray, their eyes hollow voids that seemed to devour the light around them. A twisted smile stretched across their face, revealing sharp, yellowed teeth. "You've brought us home," the passenger said, their voice layered with echoes. "Now it's time for you to stay." Alex's scream was lost in the endless darkness as the town of Ravenswood closed in around him. Alex stumbled back, his breath ragged as the figure advanced. The passenger's hollow eyes locked onto him, their twisted smile widening unnaturally. The lanterns lining the street flickered violently, casting shifting shadows that seemed to writhe and crawl toward him. "You're one of us now," the figure rasped, their voice echoing like a chorus of broken glass. "You've crossed the threshold." "I didn't agree to anything," Alex shouted, his voice cracking with fear. He turned to run, but the cobblestones beneath him felt as though they were moving, shifting under his feet. He staggered, barely keeping his balance as the town seemed to warp around him. The buildings, once decrepit and crumbling, began to pulse with life. Black veins spread across the wooden walls, throbbing rhythmically like arteries. The windows, dark and lifeless a moment ago, now glowed with an eerie red light. Shadows danced inside, indistinct forms watching him from the corners. Alex's heart pounded as he darted down the street, his boots slamming against the cobblestones that felt like they were breathing. The fog thickened, swallowing everything in its path, yet he could still hear the passenger's voice behind him, growing louder. "You can't run from us, Alex. You belong here." He didn't dare look back. The oppressive air clawed at his lungs, but adrenaline pushed him forward. The narrow street opened into a small square, its centerpiece a cracked fountain. The water within it was black and viscous, bubbling as though alive. Around the square, the buildings loomed taller, their jagged edges closing in like teeth. Alex skidded to a stop, his chest heaving as he searched for an escape. The streets leading away from the square twisted impossibly, spiraling into the fog like a labyrinth designed to trap him. The whispers returned, louder now, each one more distinct than the last. "Stay. Join us. You've come so far. There's no leaving Ravenswood." Alex clamped his hands over his ears, trying to block out the voices. "This isn't real," he shouted, his voice cracking. "This can't be real." "Oh, but it is." The passenger's voice was suddenly right behind him. Alex spun around, his stomach lurching as he found himself face to face with them. Their features had deteriorated further, their skin sloughing off in patches to reveal something dark and pulsating beneath. Their suitcase hung loosely in their skeletal hand, the faint glow from within seeping through its seams. "You brought me here," Alex said, his voice trembling. "Why? What do you want from me?" "We didn't bring you," the passenger said, tilting their head. "You brought yourself." The words sent a chill down Alex's spine. "What are you talking about?" I was just doing my job." The passenger's grin widened. "This was always your destination. Every decision, every turn, led you here. Ravenswood calls to those who are ready." "Ready for what?" Alex demanded, his voice rising with desperation. "To let go." Before Alex could respond, the passenger opened the suitcase. The glow intensified, flooding the square with a sickly, pulsating light. Alex staggered backward, shielding his eyes as the air around him grew heavy. The light seemed to seep into his skin, filling him with a cold, numbing sensation. The ground beneath him cracked, and he looked down to see the cobblestones splitting apart, revealing an endless void below. Shadows poured out of the cracks, writhing and twisting as they wrapped around his legs, pulling him toward the darkness. Alex screamed, clawing at the ground as the shadows dragged him closer to the abyss. "I don't belong here." The passenger knelt beside him, their hollow eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. "Everyone belongs here, eventually." The shadows surged upward, enveloping Alex in a suffocating embrace. The world around him dissolved into darkness, the passenger's twisted smile the last thing he saw before everything went black. When Alex opened his eyes, he was back on the bus. The familiar hum of the engine filled his ears, and the fluorescent lights flickered softly overhead. His hands were on the wheel, the cracked asphalt stretching out before him. For a moment, he thought it had all been a dream, a vivid, horrible dream. But the bus wasn't empty. The passenger sat in the seat directly behind him, their suitcase resting on their lap. Their face was calm now, their features almost human again. Alex's stomach twisted as he realized the truth. he hadn't escaped. "You understand now, don't you?" the passenger said, their voice softer, almost gentle. Alex gripped the wheel tightly, his knuckles white. "I don't want to be here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to go home." "This is home," the passenger replied. "You've been driving in circles for so long, Alex. It's time to stop." As they spoke, the bus began to slow, the engine groaning as the road ahead disappeared into the fog. Alex's pulse quickened as he realized the vehicle was coming to a stop in front of a sign. It read, "Welcome to Ravenswood. Population 1. The number flickered, and then it changed. Population 2. Alex stared at the sign, his blood running cold as the flickering digits settled on population 2. The oppressive silence of Ravenswood pressed down on him, broken only by the faint hum of the bus's engine as it idled. He clenched the wheel tighter, his breath shallow and rapid. "This isn't happening," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "This can't be real." The passenger behind him chuckled softly, a sound devoid of humor. "You still don't understand, do you? Ravenswood isn't a place you find. It's a place that finds you." Alex's chest tightened as the meaning of their words sank in. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I don't belong here. I never wanted to come here." The passenger leaned forward, their hollow eyes reflecting the dim glow of the bus's interior lights. "Ravenswood is a sanctuary, Alex. A refuge for those who've run out of roads in the world they left behind. You've been running for so long, haven't you?" The words hit Alex like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to protest, but found no words. Memories surfaced, unbidden. Years of empty nights, lonely drives, and the crushing weight of a life lived in isolation. He had always convinced himself that he was content with the silence, but now he wasn't so sure. The passenger's voice softened, almost pitying. "You were already lost before you ever stepped on this bus." Alex shook his head violently, his grip on the wheel tightening. No, I'm not staying here. I don't care what you say. I'm leaving." He slammed the bus into reverse, the engine roaring as he pressed the pedal to the floor. The vehicle lurched backward, the headlights cutting through the fog as it sped away from the sign. Alex didn't dare look in the mirror. He focused solely on the road ahead, or what he thought was ahead. But the road didn't lead back to the world he knew. The asphalt twisted and turned in impossible ways, looping back on itself like a snake devouring its tail. The fog thickened, swallowing the headlights and leaving Alex blind. The bus's tires screeched as it skidded across the slick surface, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever. "You can't leave. You belong here. Stop running, Alex." He gritted his teeth, refusing to listen. "I'll find a way out," he growled, his voice hoarse. "I don't care what it takes." The bus groaned in protest, as if the vehicle itself was fighting against him. The dashboard lights flickered, and the steering wheel jerked violently in his hands, nearly wrenching free. Alex struggled to keep control, sweat dripping down his face as the whispers grew deafening. And then the road disappeared. The bus hurtled forward into nothingness, the wheels spinning uselessly as it plummeted into the void. Alex's stomach dropped, a scream tearing from his throat as the darkness consumed him. The bus spun wildly, its lights extinguished, leaving him in absolute silence and blackness. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, with a sudden jolt, the bus came to a stop. Alex gasped, clutching the wheel as his vision adjusted. The lights flickered back on, revealing the same cracked asphalt and dead trees. He was back in Ravenswood. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. No. The passenger was standing now, their suitcase still clutched tightly in their bony hand. They regarded Alex with a mixture of pity and amusement. "You can't outrun it, Alex. No one ever does." "Why me?" Alex demanded, his voice raw with desperation. "Why did you choose me?" "We didn't choose you," the passenger said simply. "You chose yourself." Alex slumped back in his seat, his hands falling limply to his sides. His mind raced, searching for a way out, but every road led back to the same place. Ravenswood was a trap with no escape, and he was its latest victim. The passenger moved toward the doors, their hollow eyes fixed on Alex. "There's one last stop to make," they said, "and then you'll understand." The doors hissed open, revealing a small, dilapidated building bathed in the eerie red light that seemed to emanate from the very ground. The sign above the door read, "Station Office." Alex hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to stay on the bus. But the passenger was already stepping off, their silhouette vanishing into the thick fog. Alex swallowed hard, his throat dry, and followed. The air outside was frigid, biting through his clothes as he approached the building. The door creaked open on its own, revealing a dimly lit interior lined with old, dusty filing cabinets. A single desk sat in the center, its surface cluttered with yellowed papers and an ancient typewriter. The passengers stood behind the desk, their suitcase placed carefully on top. They gestured for Alex to sit in the worn chair opposite them. Against his better judgment, he obeyed. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is where it ends," the passenger replied. "And where it begins." They opened the suitcase, the faint glow within spilling out and illuminating the room. Alex stared at the object inside, a cracked mirror. Its surface shimmered, reflecting not his face but fragments of his life. Empty nights on the road, fleeting connections, and the crushing loneliness that had become his constant companion. "This is your truth," the passenger said. "Ravenswood isn't just a town, it's a mirror. It shows you what you've been running from." Alex's throat tightened as the images in the mirror shifted, showing him as he was now, hollow-eyed, weary, and defeated. He wanted to look away, but the mirror's pull was too strong. "You can stay here," the passenger continued, their voice almost kind. "Make peace with your past. Or you can keep running. The choice is yours." Alex's hands trembled as he reached for the mirror. The glass felt cold against his skin, and the glow intensified, enveloping him in its light. For a moment, he saw everything clearly: the roads he had taken, the choices he had made, and the endless cycle of running that had brought him here. Tears streamed down his face as he realized the truth. "I don't want to run anymore," he whispered. The passenger nodded, a faint smile crossing their face. "Then Ravenswood will be your home." The light consumed Alex, and the world around him dissolved. When the fog lifted, the bus sat empty at the edge of the town. The sign now read, "Welcome to Ravenswood. Population 3. And somewhere, in the silence of the night, another road began to twist and turn, searching for its next traveler.